Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello and welcome, all you porcupines. I am, as always, your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Welcome to the Porcupine Report, episode 27. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're going to have a great episode tonight. As I mentioned last week was the last episode in my old office in Auburn, Maine. And I'm coming to you now recording from my new office, which is in Dover, New Hampshire, as I continue inch by inch to make the step as I further my transition from Maine into New Hampshire. I'm still in that transition, not quite fully transitioned over just yet. But this whole year has been a wild transition, getting to know New Hampshire so much more, all the Free State community. And what a blast, what a ride. So if you're watching the video version of this episode, this place isn't quite totally assembled yet. I've got a few barren bookshelves behind me that maybe in the future will be filled with fun stuff. But anyway, it's a work in progress. And tonight, well, first of all, I'll introduce our guest in a moment. I would like to mention the big event coming up in actually just this weekend. So it's probably too late to get tickets. I've been telling you for a few weeks about tickets for this event. This is YALCON, the Young Americans for Liberty Convention, taking place in Orlando, Florida, August 1st through the 3rd. Actually, on Thursday, so the day after this episode comes out, I'm catching a flight. I'm going down to Orlando. It's going to be a great convention with thousands of young liberty activists from across the country. Young Americans for Liberty, perhaps, maybe second to the Free State Project, is, I think, one of the most important liberty organizations in this country for what they've been doing in mobilizing and activating young people to go out and make a difference for the cause of freedom and liberty. In particularly mobilizing people to go and knock doors for liberty candidates for state legislative office around the country. And they've even been doing a lot of that here in New Hampshire, which accounts for why partly accounts for why there's been so much success in liberty candidates winning election to the New Hampshire House. So anyway, Young Americans for Liberty is great. And if it's probably too late to get tickets now, but if you are going, I would look forward to seeing you there. And if you can't make it, look for the videos that will be coming out. Great people are speaking there, including the one and only Dr. Ron Paul, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tulsi Gabbard, Dave Smith, Congressman Chip Roy, Kennedy, the one from MTV, not the one running for president, Jeff Frazee, Spike Cohen, Brandon Herrera, Sean Tima, and for some reason, this Eric Brakey guy gets to be on the stage with all of these magnificent people. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be great to go back and see all the folks at Young Americans for Liberty, where I was their national spokesman for about a year, a few years back, and it'll be a nice homecoming seeing everyone down there and telling them why they should come and check out New Hampshire and come up for our events like the New Hampshire Liberty Forum or the Porcupine Freedom Festival next year. And actually, there's a lot to talk about with the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, a great kind of new concept for it we're doing this year. But in future episodes, we'll have a lot more to talk about with you on the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, maybe even next week. So, but anyway, YALCON, maybe I'll see you there. And if not, hopefully you can check out some of the speeches that are coming out of it. All right, so that's what's happening this weekend. But what's happening tonight is we have a great guest. His name is Skot Sheller. Now, he is one of the founders of the Shell social club, one of 4 Liberty social clubs in the free state of New Hampshire. This one is in the Seacoast region, or we call it the Freecoast in New Hampshire, and which is the region that I'm moving into. Now I asked him if the shell is named after him. His last name is Skot Sheller. Apparently, it's no relation. It's pure coincidence. But he is one of the founders there. He's also kind of viewed as kind of the resident expert on Argentina in the Free State movement, and probably because he lets everyone know. The first time I met him at an event at the Shell, he was wearing a big shirt with Javier Milei's face on it, and he said, I don't remember what he said exactly, but he asked me if I'd been following things in Argentina, and we had a great conversation about it. And in fact, he's such an expert on what's going on in Argentina with Javier Milei that he was recently featured on the Tom Woods Show, talking with the great Tom Woods about the goings-on in Argentina, where you have an actual anarcho-capitalist who's been elected president, or at least a self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist. So anyway, we're going to welcome Skot to the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the Liberty movement might take away from what we see happening in Argentina. So, Skot, welcome to the show.
Hey, welcome to New Hampshire, and great to be here.
Well, hey, Skot, you gave me such a warm welcome, and you've been giving me continuously a warm welcome as I make the transition over to New Hampshire. So thank you for the welcome once again.
No problem.
So Argentina, obviously, we set the stage a little bit. I think those who've been paying attention have heard something happen in Argentina. Big surprise, upset election, kind of after decades of this Peronist government, which is really kind of a socialist government that has kind of driven the nation's economy into the ground, where Argentina once used to be, one of the most prosperous countries in the world. They've been dealing with rampant hyperinflation, a terrible economy. It's so bad that there's a musical about Evita Peron, one of the Peronist movement kind of getting their grip in Argentina. Decades and decades after this, this figure, Javier Milei, a very brash, outspoken, take no apologies figure, and I guess some people compare him to Donald Trump in terms of his brashness, but unlike Donald Trump, he seems to have a much more clearly articulated economic worldview rooted in Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism. He's won the presidency, and he's dealing with a coalition government where to try to get his agenda through. So anyway, that's setting the stage a little bit. You're much more knowledgeable than I am. What can you tell us about, I guess, first, the rise into prominence of Javier Milei, and how, first of all, how did this happen? Help us understand that.
Yeah. Javier Milei started out as just an economist, and he was really a nobody. My father-in-law knew him about 10 years ago. He's an Argentinian economist, and nobody knew Javier Milei. He was an academic. He'd published like 50 papers, and he was an economist at a major corporation in Argentina. But he wasn't even a libertarian. He became a libertarian about 10 years ago in a search to discover how we became so rich. How did the humans go from thousands of years of poverty with no growth, basically, to 200 years of just rapid, sustainable growth? And through that process, he learned about Rothbard, and that just blew his mind. Reading Rothbard, it was one of his students gave him Power and Market, and Power and Market everything that he'd ever come across, he thought was just wrong. And he quickly became an ANCAP too. Partly one of the big impetuses for that was he read Market for Liberty, which is a book that explains how a market society can solve the problems of public goods and all that sort of thing. So he becomes a radical libertarian, and which just in Argentina at the time was absolutely a fringe, selfish ideology. My father-in-law is an Argentinian economist and a free market Austrian professor, and he was censored and everything else in Argentina, not allowed to teach what he wanted to teach, not allowed to go on the radio, so that sort of thing. And he was considered selfish. Well, here comes Javier Milei, and he starts going on. Gets this new ideology that he loves, like you and I, and he gets a chance to go on a television show. So he's an academic, and a lot of times academics, especially economists, are viewed a little bit more highly in Argentina, except for they're all Keynesians, of course. He and like my father-in-law and like 5 other people at the time were the only non-Keynesian free market type of people. So he goes on a show and he is just totally brash, as you say, no diplomacy, and even cussing. And
is this the interview where he's calling people like shit leftists?
Absolutely. Like he was on for like 6 years, and this is just his routine. I was watching it at the time. It was hilarious. He would go on television, and there was one show where there's like 10 different people, and Milei would be the only one, and that's where he would call them shit leftist, and he called people parasites to their face, and that's where he would just go berserk. And he was brought on first by a guy named Fantino, who gave him a shot in, and he and Fantino just got this great chemistry, and they basically kept bringing Milei on because everybody wanted to see what he had to say and what he was going to do. And that's how it started. And people said they came for the insults, and then they stayed for the common sense. And during that time, you saw this burgeoning libertarian movement that just never existed before. On Instagram, all of a sudden, my wife and I would see these libertarians in Argentina, and obviously inspired by Javier Milei. And they were like Milei, not very diplomatic. And it was just kind of a fun experience. We just saw every month Milei's Instagram following getting a little bit bigger. He was always fun to watch. So what happened was he just kept kind of becoming a bigger and bigger celebrity in Argentina. And during the COVID pandemic, it just got so insane there. Their lockdowns were the worst in the world, arguably, very long. They put many people in jail for just walking around. Famously, in the province of Formosa, their really nasty governor was throwing people in jail left and right. And Milei's like, I want to do something about this. And another thing they were doing is they were actually talking about censoring Milei from television, removing him, because Argentina controls a lot of the media. The Kirchner government of the last 20 years started paying all the media money to speak the government's propaganda and nationalized media sources. So there was a lot of pressure to get Milei off the television and censor him. So that's when Milei, when you have a guy that's just minding his own business and the government tries to take everything from him, that's when he gets radicalized and he starts getting involved. That's when Milei started to get involved. And he started a party called La Libertad Avanza. It's a coalition of parties and coalition of libertarian and conservatarian parties in all the provinces. And he decided to run for their Congress, basically. They call it the deputies, but it's basically like the U.S. Congress, lower house. And in 2021, he was not expected to do very well running as a libertarian, but Milei would say what everybody wanted to hear. He would talk about the lockdowns. He was against vaccine mandates. he was the only one talking about inflation. And that just resonated with people. He was already at that time getting massive crowds everywhere, every time he went anywhere. And he had this massive following already. Well, now it's much bigger, but it was still pretty big. And in Buenos Aires, he got enough percentage of the vote to actually get into their Congress. As a brand new third party, La Libertad Avanza, and he got into their Congress, and it was I remember at the time it was absolutely like groundbreaking news. This outsider libertarian gets into our Congress, because their Congress is really, their politicians are almost like the old Romans. It's really a caste. It's really hard for any outsider to get in there. And so when Milei did this outspoken guy, it was just huge news in Argentina. I remember. And Milei is just a genius at publicity. So immediately getting into Congress, he starts raffling off his salary. So the idea was people would join his newsletter. They in Caba province, the city of Buenos Aires, and he would raffle. He would get email or newsletter subscriptions, and he would raffle off his salary to one lucky winner. So this made him extremely popular in the country, because everybody's like, I want to be on his news.
What a great way to build your email list.
Yes, he built his email list, and it just like made him so. And he would be like, he would make a huge spectacle every single time he was giving away his salary. It was really funny. I remember, and it made him even more popular. Milei just he would give these grand speeches to the Congress, and of course with his Milei no diplomacy brashness, talking about what people wanted to talk about or wanted to hear.
Was at that point in time, was he the only member of his party in Congress? Is it like a parliamentary system, or like in terms of people vote for the party, or do people vote for like the individual candidate?
They vote for the individual candidate, and there was only one other La Libertad Avanza person in Congress. It was Victoria Villarruel, his vice president.
Oh, okay.
His vice president and Milei were the only two that were elected in 2021. So shortly after he gets into Congress, he starts campaigning for president. And it was just uncanny. Everywhere he went, he would just get these massive, massive crowds. I remember the first time I saw it, he went down to Ushuaia, Tierra del Fuego, and this is typically a very Peronist area. And just as far as you could see, like 10,000 people. Ushuaia is not that big of a town, but it looked like 10,000 people surrounding him, all just wanted to see Milei. And it was everywhere he went, he was just getting mobbed and everywhere. And he became this massive celebrity in Argentina. When he started to run, the polling was showing that he might actually become president. I didn't believe it, of course. When I was in Argentina, it felt like this Ron Paul energy. I was there in November of 2022. You saw Milei stickers all over the place. And it had this Ron Paul type of energy. And what happened is his opponents just the center right party was a failure when they took power in 2015. They didn't change a thing. And then the Peronist Kirchner party has just driven the country into the ground, and people were just fed up with it. And they've been caught stealing billions of dollars from the treasury. So you had the center right who weren't very popular. You had the Kirchners who were extremely not popular, and then you had this crazy libertarian third party guy that's the only one talking about inflation. It was like the country wasn't even going through an economic crisis in their debates. You, even though the country is going through 230% inflation and a severe depression. And Milei is the only one talking about these things and saying, yes, we need to cut government spending. We need to make an adjustment. We need to get rid of the peso. So this is why Milei captured so many of the young people, and then the young people essentially loved Milei, and then they convinced their parents to vote for Milei, and which is why he won.
Well, I mean, it really is kind of exciting to see what a radical kind of libertarianism married with a kind of populist kind of communication style and populist fever of, this is one of the things that always kind of frustrates me kind of in so much of our kind of debates about political strategy and in the libertarian movement in America is you have oftentimes this resistance to populism, this resistance to kind of really kind of trying to, reach out to the common man and kind of and point them at the right enemies, right? I always think of like populism. Certainly we can look at populist figures who are not people we would necessarily support as libertarians. Bernie Sanders, for example, is a form of populism. He's kind of a socialist populist. Donald Trump is a populist who's kind of all over the place with things. But, I've always seen populism as like a strategy of like mobilizing the people against the entrenched power structure. But by itself, it's really lacking a clear ideology. But Rothbardian libertarianism just matches so well with populism, and that intellectual framework married with the passion and motivating the people to come out and overthrow corrupt establishments. Like that's to some degree, that's what Ron Paul managed to achieve. Of course, it didn't get him into the presidency. But it was the most successful effort we've had in America. But Javier Milei, I think, has really showed that marriage of populism and libertarianism, it can propel a real principled libertarian into a position of the presidency of their country. And so he's gotten there on this populist libertarian message. How's it been going? I know that he's had to his party had to form a coalition government with basically the more traditional conservative party, correct? And the Peronists. Well, first of all, let me ask you, how would you describe kind of Peronism? So I guess for most of people being in America who are watching this, like, how would you compare like Peronism to kind of like the socialism espoused by someone like an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
I think Peron himself was a fascist.
He was a fascist. Okay.
Absolutely. He was a general that essentially took power in a military coup, and he convinced them basically to become president. He outsmarted the military, and he was really an incredible propagandist. But he got all of his training with Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was his hero, and he learned how Mussolini used mass communications to propagandize the people. So it definitely got a fascist tint to it. It's mercantilist. It's a very closed. They are extremely protectionist. So they do not believe in free trade. They do not even believe they even tax exports. They want everything to sort of stay in the country. They believe in heavy unionization. They believe in heavy nationalization. They believe in high taxes. Really, really low on economic freedom. It is a sort of a form of national socialism. I would hate to say it. Peronists are extremely nationalists, but in a very protectionist way, and they are very, very any foreign trade or any foreign investment that is very frowned upon in Argentina to the Peronists. So it is quite socialist, but it's extremely mercantilist. And Argentina is an absolute economic prison. You cannot import without government permission. You cannot export without government permission. You have to pay. You have export taxes, one of 3 countries in the world, and import taxes. So it's just kind of the worst of all worlds.
Now, what has kept the Peronists in power for so long? Because obviously there have been democratic elections regularly in Argentina. Otherwise, Javier Milei wouldn't have been able to become president in the first place. Things certainly have not seemed to be working out for Argentina for a long time, and yet the Peronists seem to have managed to maintain control through democratic systems of the country. Is it just like promises of social welfare programs to people? Is it how many people they put into government jobs? Like what kept the Peronists in power for so long?
Well, they didn't really have much of an opposition for a long time. The radicals were their opposition, but they were almost more socialist than the Peronists. So essentially, they did have in the 90s a Peronist, but he was actually kind of a market guy, Menem. And Argentina actually returned to prosperity in the 90s. But what happens is, right when it's about to blow, that's when it seems like they'll let somebody else get elected, like La Rua in 2020, and the economy just blows up. And they're like, "Oh, look, we just elected a capitalist. Look what happened. We just elected one of your people, and the economy just blew up. It didn't matter that the deficit and everything else was already a wreck." And that's sort of what happened. What they were hoping would happen with
kind of like hot potato. The thing is going off, and you hope that the person who's holding it is someone who you can frame as responsible for it all.
Absolutely, and they've also ever since the 30s, they've also every decade from the 30s to, you could argue, the 80s, there was at least one military coup. So there was for a long time the military would take control when the political situation just got out of hand, and including Perón's second term, whereas actually his wife took over when he died. So that is involved too, because the military would take over for the longest time, and then they had a terrible military dictatorship from 1976 to 1982, where he famously fought the Falkland Island Wars, or the Malvinas, for the Malvina Isles. So that's and since they returned to democracy, they had a good president in Menem. He was better, I guess, than the rest of them. And they've had just terrible. And the last 20 years was dominated by the Kirchner family. The husband, Kirchner, he died in office, and then his wife took over, and she had 8 years, and so that was basically 16 years of power. And they weaponized the state to consolidate political power. They're the ones that started to pay the journalists, nationalize television stations, use treasury funds for campaigns and to promote their political power. And she was extreme, even though she was a socialist, even though she destroyed the economy, she was extremely popular when she was president until the end, when it got really bad. But then she got caught stealing $18 billion. But she was just an incredible propagandist, one of the best probably in the last 25 years. And that's basically how they've taken power the last 25 years, or since 2000, since 2003, I believe they were in power with a small 4-year outsider named Macri that did absolutely nothing.
Okay.
So they basically it just seems to morph, and And since they returned to democracy, it's been one form or another of Peronism, really up until Milei.
So fast forwarding again back to today. So Milei wins the election. He's the president. He seems to have been enjoying a honeymoon period for a while. He was going around the world. He was speaking. I remember him going to what was it? The World Economic Forum, and basically delivering a denouncement of them and all their policies to their face. I have really appreciated that this is a moment where like AI exists, because I've appreciated. It's one thing to see a speech that Javier Milei is giving and read like a the translations at the bottom, but it's great to hear like these AI versions where they've like dubbed they basically dubbed over it in his own voice. You can like hear it in English as if he's delivering the speech in English. I mean, that's been awesome. Of course, one of the hard things as an English speaker is to watch this great kind of revolution happen in Argentina and have the language barrier to not fully kind of be able to immediately go to the source and understand what's going on. And I know you've pointed out at times that this has been a source of people spreading disinformation about what's actually going on in Argentina. So he's gotten a lot of international attention, but it hasn't been all easy going. What have you seen as some of the obstacles for his new government since he's come to the presidency?
Well, the obstacles is that his party only got a small portion of the Congress. So it's a party that's only 2-3 years old, and they did really well. They got 42 out of 275 seats, and then 7 out of 72 in the Senate. So they've had to create this coalition government. And the Peronists are just very persistent. They're very strong in the Congress, and basically what they were hoping is that they weren't going to pass his things. The economy was just going to collapse on him, and they were going to kick him out of office. And what happened is he was able to creatively find ways to cut spending and balance the budget. So they took 6 months to pass any legislation whatsoever for Milei. They refused to pass anything, and then he finally passed legislation. I believe it was in July. So that's been a huge struggle. Just the economy was doing terrible when he started office. It was essentially hyperinflating as he took office. It was inflation was rising 1% a day, which is annualized very high. It's over 1,000% a year, compound interest, of course, and it was in a massive recession. The central bank was absolutely a total disaster. They have a Ponzi scheme in the central bank that was intended to try to slow down. Anyways, it's basically monetary policy with their peso, and over time it just became this massive Ponzi scheme that Milei had to deal with. So he was just in this dire economic crisis as he entered office.
Well, I remember seeing people criticizing him for the way I saw it framed, of course, was, he was shutting down protests and he was threatening to arrest people for free speech. But then you seem to look into it a little bit more, and it's like, well, what they're calling protests certainly look a lot like riots where people are using violence and shutting down major roadways that commerce depends on. I think you were giving me some context when we were talking about this a few weeks back. You said, correct me if I'm misremembering this, but like everything kind of flows through, is it Buenos Aires? And so if you shut down the roads in Buenos Aires, you shut down like commerce throughout the whole country and the ability to kind of get goods places. And so a lot of protesters or rioters or whatever you call them will just kind of blockade the roads. and if you try to stop them from doing this, you're being propagandized against as someone who is against free speech. But he was threatening to arrest people for this activity. What can you tell us about all of that?
That's exactly right. That's it's one of the problems with having your major economic center being your capital, whereas the rioters can just take over the streets and totally shut down the city. And they were doing this like multiple times a week and severely harming commerce, and also rioting, also doing property destruction, et cetera, et cetera. And Milei, first he said, if we catch you and you're on any corta no cobra, if you cut the roads, you're not going to get your welfare payments. We're going to not send you your welfare payments. And that almost stopped it immediately. So it was hilarious. The first riot where they're supposed to get like 50,000 people, and they had it was within a week of Milei becoming president, and they had all these signs: "Corta no cobra," meaning if you cut, you're not going to get paid. And they got not even a fraction of the people cutting the roads. So they this is a major problem. And Milei is like, you're not going to cut the roads. We're not going to let you cut the roads. You can protest on the sidewalks. You can protest on the parks. And when they protest in those areas, that no problem. Milei doesn't do anything to them. But if they're gonna be disruptive to commerce, if they're gonna be disruptive to the roads, yeah, he's going to try to protect the roads. And that's one of the reasons he's more popular now is because he's not these protesters are not disrupting the commerce in Argentina and Buenos Aires.
So tell me a little bit about the legislation that just got passed. I know there was a lot of build up to this. It passed by like a single vote in the Senate. I'm sure it had been watered down from his kind of initial version, but can you tell us a little bit more about, so what was he seeking to do with this legislation in the first place? What was the original vision for it? And what ended up being passed in the end? Like how significant an accomplishment is the passage of this legislation, and what does it do?
It's quite significant. It was watered down, of course, because his first bill, the lay basis, his basis law, it's based on an old Argentinian classical liberal. He had a law called the lay basis, but anyways, Milei renamed it after him. And anyways, the first law was probably the most libertarian law in the history of the world. And it did everything from allow self-defense to legalizing homeschooling to privatizing every single aspect of almost every single government company, and also deregulating a lot of things like the labor market. But that failed. And his next law that he just passed, the Pacto de Mayo, it goes along with that. It privatizes some businesses. It frees up labor laws and labor. It allows for deregulation and allows Milei to fire a lot more people. Because Milei was very, very hindered in who he could fire. So now Milei is already last week announced that he was going to abolish 60 more government organizations from this law. So it gives him a lot more power to reform the government. And it also allows him to privatize a certain amount of the government businesses. And a lot of these businesses are just massive money losers, where they lose so much money and the people have to The citizens have to subsidize them.
What are some examples of government run businesses in Argentina that we might be surprised to imagine government in the business of doing?
The biggest one is the Kirchner government nationalized the airlines. So Argentina Airlines, I've flown on it. And since they nationalized it, it's lost $9 billion. And it's and Milei actually proposed that they sell it back to the employees, which the unions, of course, didn't like, which is wow. Wouldn't you want to own the company? But
I always think that that's brilliant. I'd always thought that if you were ever to like try to privatize the U.S. Post Office, that's exactly the political strategy you would have to do to use it. Sell it to the employees, right? And then it can't be you can't be accused of like being anti-labor or any of that. So I think that's brilliant. And I do remember watching that like the union bosses were coming out against it. But this would have been great for the people they supposedly represent. So it makes you wonder who the union bosses actually represent.
Well, it's so bloated, the amount of workers. Argentina Airlines has the most workers per airplane in the entire world. So to make it profitable, if they privatize it, they would have to lay off a lot of people. That's part of it. So that's part of the reason a lot of those jobs would go away. Other things, the trains are nationalized. They like their UPS, Corrientes is nationalized, so they're like UPS mail services nationalized. And their oil companies nationalized. That's the one that actually is profitable, though. Mm-hmm. But there's so many other little things that are nationalized, businesses that are nationalized. There's 41 big ones. Milei is only allowed to privatize I think it's like 15 or 17 of them. So he's going to continue to push this privatization of these just absolutely just black hole businesses.
Awesome. Now I know that you and I were recently at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, and there had been talk that Javier Milei was going to come to Freedom Fest and speak there, and I was looking forward to seeing him. I can only imagine you must have been even more excited than I was to hear him speak. But I know in interview I did with the founder of Freedom Fest right before it was told that, well, kind of the honeymoon phase for him may be over. He's facing a lot of challenges back home that he decided he needed to be there for, and not seen as just kind of doing this international circuit of kind of touring the world. So do you agree with that assessment that the honeymoon phase is over in Argentina, and he's well, first of all, how long is his term? Is it 4 years like here in the United States?
4 years, yeah.
So he
re-election.
What's that?
With one re-election, just like the United States. Their constitution is actually modeled after the United States Constitution.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to worry about re-election immediately. Of course, he has to worry about getting his policy agenda through. How are things? I guess how is public perception kind of changing in Argentina from what you can see now that he's got this legislative accomplishment done? I guess the inflation rates are coming down. Are people still excited, or has kind of that honeymoon phase kind of worn off? And I imagine they're going to have. Do they have midterm elections like ours? What do people expect that his party might gain more seats? Like what do you see things as they are now and potentially going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Milei is actually arguably more popular now than he was when he became president. He a lot of lies were told about him. He had really no money when he was running, and so many lies were told about him. And then people are finding out that, he's actually not this monster that everybody said he was. He's actually, I think he's more popular now, or he's just as popular as he was. His approval rating is around 56%.
Okay.
It's above 50. So he's quite popular.
I don't know the last time I ever saw a U.S. president with approval ratings over 50%. So that's pretty good.
That's right. And he's actually doing what he said he was going to do. He's actually taking action. He's actually cutting spending. He's cutting a lot. He had the biggest spending cut arguably in world history in like 2 months. So he's doing what he said he would do. And when this guy is talking about his honeymoon period coming to an end, I don't know if that's totally accurate. What happened was his that law that we talked about was just passed right before Freedom Fest, and they were commemorating it on July 9th, which is their Independence Day. So I think there's also with Milei, one of the criticisms that I think people are giving him, and I think he accepted it, is they were saying he was traveling too much. He's leaving Argentina too much. And I think Milei took that to heart. So since then, he's been actually in Argentina. For example, during the Paris Olympics, he gave a speech to the farmers, to the farming organizations, and how he's going to lower their taxes and all that sort of thing. So he's been doing a lot more in Argentina now, and before that too. I mean, he was doing a lot, but he had no legislation passed. So all of his actions were from decree or whatnot. So now that he has his legislation passed, which gives him quite a bit of power, actually, he's in full. They are going 1,000 miles an hour.
Great. He's in full governance mode.
Full governance mode. They're doing a lot of really cool things right now to deregulate the economy, to cut spending. So he is trying, and he's got a couple hurdles with some of the banking systems. And he's trying to open up the banking systems. He's trying to fix the terrible economy that he was given, the terrible inheritance that he had, which is like just a massive task. And that's just what he's focused on right now. And then, just to go to Freedom Fest, what does that really benefit him? So,
yeah. Though I do remember at Freedom Fest, you, me, and a few others were out one night. I think we were at we had wandered over to like the Venetian we were exploring, and you're wearing your Javier Milei shirt, and I think two guys came over. I don't know if they were from Argentina, but anyway, you guys were speaking some language I didn't understand, but they seemed very excited about your Javier Milei shirt.
They were Argentinians from Buenos Aires, and they liked Milei, and they were like, "Viva la libertad, carajo!" They were so excited to see a Milei shirt. And that's one reason why Argentinians are actually very proud and happy with Milei, is he's giving them a sense of pride. The politicians in Argentina have always just been considered these corrupt defaulters and these unserious people. And then here's Milei. He's going, he's going to the WEF. He's meeting with all the presidents around the world. He's giving speeches to them, and he's kind of bringing a sense of pride to their country again, but outside of just soccer. Yeah. And they really like that. They like that Milei. They saw him on the cover of Time, and it gives them lots of them a sense of pride in their country again. And he's serious. His government is serious, and Milei just has this way of talking where he gives you so much hope. And that's when the one thing that they poll when people think about Milei is they think about hope and for the future. So Milei,
finish your thought.
Yeah, so that's one reason why the economy is getting better. They had their first month of economic growth. Yeah. Their inflation went from basically hyperinflation to now it's gone. It was 30% a month, or is 25 officially, to it's below, it's like 3% a month. I mean, it's gone down so much, and their economy is coming back a little bit. Wages are rising to inflation. So this basically is almost impossible in Keynesian theory, by the way. Like so it's like what he's saying is actually working, and yeah. So
well, let me ask you. And now we're coming to the end of the episode, but there's two more questions I want to ask for you. So first, I know one of the criticisms I see of Javier Milei in libertarian circles is around foreign policy, and I think particularly of Daniel McAdams, who's the co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I think has been fairly critical of Javier, and I know that Javier Milei has said certain things that seem to be kind of in alignment with kind of the foreign policy consensus in Washington, D.C., which does, I guess, at times give me some concerns. But I suppose at the same time, I also recognize that Javier Milei is not the emperor of the world like the president of the United States is, and so maybe it's not as his stated foreign policy views are not as high stakes as the foreign policy views of the U.S. presidency. And also, I suppose there must be, to some degree, you just kind of come in this kind of big election in a South American country. You don't want to be taken out by the CIA. I don't know to what degree he's concerned about that or not, but I also know that you've harped on certain things that people have put statements into his mouth or reported things on foreign policy that he hasn't actually said. What's your take overall on Javier Milei's foreign policy, and how would you recommend a kind of a libertarian form of perspective on that?
Well, people like McAdams never talk about when Milei talks about a libertarian foreign policy. Milei has outlined his vision for Argentina in the future, and is to be a country in Argentina that sits back from the rest of the world and tries to solve problems, tries to negotiate problems. And he talks about being a protagonist trader. He talks about how Argentina doesn't have any conflicts at their borders. They really don't have any enemies, and how Argentina can be this peace-loving country that tries to solve world problems, that is a protagonist trader. He says this over and over. Now, what McAdams and some of these other people are talking about, who they don't ever cover that part. They never cover when Milei is a peacenik and talking about peace, but they talk about how Milei he was against the Russian invasion. They talk about how he likes Israel. A couple things on this. For one, on the Russian invasion, Malay's actually been very nice to Russia. They have not sanctioned Russians. Russians are free to come to Argentina, free to travel to Argentina. In fact, they have so many Russians in Argentina that some signs are in Russian. And they've been pretty nice to the Russians. And secondly, when he went to this peace conference, the peace summit, Milei gave a speech that even pro-Russian geopolitical people were like, wow, he really sounded like he wants reconciliation with Russia. He said that, you can hate them, but if you don't trade with your neighbor, if you're not willing to have commerce with your neighbor, you're going to go bankrupt. You need to treat your neighbor well. And he talked about how if trade doesn't enter borders, armies will. And he really seemed to talk about how they need to start to re-engage with Russia, not just make them this pariah enemy. And by the way, which he has not. He's been trading with Russia, and he's been friendly with China too. They've made some agreements with China. and he's been friendly with all those countries. So I think his foreign policy is actually much more peaceful. I could get into the whole BRICS situation. They were set to join BRICS, and they didn't, for good reason, and that put them kind of out there by themselves. And so of course, they wanted to be friendly with the United States.
Well, that's good to hear. We are running really short on time, and I want to get in one last question. So just real quick response here. We're talking a lot about Argentina, but of course, with our program and our movement, the Free State movement, we're focused on building a free society in New Hampshire. What if you were to draw kind of one lesson from the success of the Milei movement in Argentina? What lesson would you say the Free State movement should take away that would help benefit what we're doing here?
I think just the usage of social media, the building your brand as kind of this cool person. I think we need to build our brand as individuals, as individuals, as like cool people. And it's not just Milei. His whole party has this whole strategy. And there's a lot of famous La Libertad Avanza libertarians now in Argentina. And they do it by being out there. They do it by going on social media and doing fun things. And as a result, 70% of the young people voted for Milei, people under the age of 25. So that's just that. I think building our brand and making us cool seems to work.
And being bold, apparently, being bold and brash. Well, all right, we're at the end of it. Any final words you want to share before we cut away?
No, just come to New Hampshire. We not only are we the experts on Argentina, but we're the best on crypto. We're the best on everything libertarian. You'll find the expert in New Hampshire. So
awesome. Live free or die. Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate you coming on. And it's been fascinating having these conversations with you over the course of this past year on Argentina and getting to do it now, a conversation with all of our audience. So thank you, Scott. It's I'll keep seeing you around the Free State. Now that I'm moving into the Seacoast area, I'm sure I'll see you at the Shell.
Yep. Thank you very much. It's a great honor.
Thank you, Scott. All right, everyone. That's the show. As I mentioned, tomorrow, Thursday, I'm flying to Orlando for the Young Americans for Liberty National Convention. If you're going and you see me there, please say hello. I would love to hear from you. Love to meet you and hear your feedback on the show. And other than that, we will be back next week with a new episode. I want to thank, as always, our producer, Renita, for all the work she does every single week, bringing a high-quality, high-production value show to you every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Now, if you've not already done so, please be sure to like, subscribe, share, retweet, comment, whatever makes sense for whatever platform you're watching the show. Help us spread the show so we can build our audience. It's very much appreciated. And on that, we're out of time. So everyone, furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.